Okay, welcome into the Cappy Hour podcast extravaganza. About to bring in my guest, who is extremely vivacious, fascinating, and handsome. Let me go grab him. And here he is. It's me. Surprise. For those who don't know me, I highly encourage you to listen to my first two episodes, which give the story of my journey. You know, they say everyone who uses the term journey has had a DUI. Guilty. But a quick summary is that 11 years ago, well, first I drank for the first time 3 months into college. Amazingly made it that far. So when I was 18 and proceeded to drink for the next 25 plus years, getting progressively worse, which is the way the alcoholism disease works. And then 11 years ago, I quit for 3.5 years, pretty much on my own before trying to drink normally. And the good news was I could. The bad news was not for long. And then it took me 6 years to get another year of sobriety under my belt. And I now have over 2 years and 2 months. And this time I've done it in community, which is really a big part of what I want to talk about today, is how you need to be in community and stay in community and always do the work. ABV, used to mean alcohol by volume, now means always be vigilant or always be fortifying, which is my ongoing word of the year. I was never a word of the year guy, but I came up with that a few years ago, and it means to strengthen physically or mentally against attack, and in our case, attack of the voice. With that said, I will tell you that yesterday I was doing shots of bourbon and Corona, and I'm going to use that as a teaser and tell you all about that in a minute. But first, what I really want to talk about is how I have been in community for about 3.5 years. Ever since my mother and sister showed up in my doorstep and did a little mini intervention. My mother tried to make me go to rehab, but I said no. But in the last few months in particular, really in the last 6 months, I've pulled back. I had stopped sharing in community. I'd stopped hosting meetings, which was something I'd started doing, which was a great step in my sobriety. And again, particularly in the last couple months, since I got back from a business coaching retreat, I've really pulled away into my hermiting ways. I used to think it was the alcoholism that kept me hermited, but I've discovered it's ADD, as I call it for short, ADHD, just as much. And I've really been noticing a weaker and weaker mental mindset. All this sober confidence I had built up has been eroded over the last couple months, including I also haven't been in the gym about 4 to 5 months. Now I'm still doing my calisthenics, love that word, from home every morning when I get up. I haven't converted to a morning person, getting up as early as 3:30 a.m. one day, but on average 4:45, 5 a.m., which I thought would also be the answer to all my ADD issues. But the primary one I thought would be being home all day, every day, nothing on my calendar, would give me the time I needed to be productive. But it's the most counterintuitive thing. It's my new definition of insanity, just like with drinking. Every day we do it and then we vow not to, and then we do it again the next day because of that voice that we need to strengthen against. But in this case, I can't get it out of my head that having all day every day is going to allow me to be productive. But if one of, ADDers need about 3 or 4 things really motivate us: novelty, competition, and deadlines. I think there's a fourth, but top of my head. So if you have all day every day, you don't have any deadlines. Thus, you don't have any sense of urgency. So it's really worked against me. And funny, quick story, when I noticed that I was getting a weaker mindset, it was last Sunday. Today is Monday, might even be June 1st of 26. And I was out for a walk at 7 a.m. I had already done my exercise And I was talking to my friend and mentor, Soba Megan, outside, and I live in a condo complex. And I was particularly just circling this one area because I wanted to stay in the sun. And thought I was talking fairly low, but I had heard a woman yelling what sounded like yelling out the window. And I was instantly convinced she was yelling at me for being on my phone and stewing around her area at 7:15 in the morning. And I was also projecting because that's something I might have done, particularly in my drinking days, not even if I was under the influence, but trying to sleep off a hangover or just being a very negative person. So anyway, I was convinced she was yelling at me. So Megan even said, "Who is that yelling?" I said, "It's a woman. I'm pretty sure she's yelling at me." She's like, "No, no way." She's like, "Call the police." It's like, "No, I didn't hear another voice." So that was another reason I thought it was a one-way thing. And I was convinced. So I walked away and I walked kind of to another area and it sounded like she had stopped yelling. So I became even more convinced it was me. And by the way, I was afraid to even look up at her window. I could tell it was coming from a third floor. I saw her window kind of slightly opened. I was afraid to even look up to see if she was standing at the window yelling at me. So, which goes against everything. I mean, I had become virtually fearless at one point in sobriety. I had to walk back by her unit to get back to mine. And I swear, as I got closer again, still thought talking lowly, I heard her start to chirp up again. I go, "Oh my God." Megan's like, "She's not yelling at you. There's no way." I said, "She's got to be." So I finally had the nerve to look up and I couldn't see her at the window. And so I got the point that I just went under her window, essentially. And I heard her yelling, "You owe me $1,500. When are you coming? When are you coming? You have destroyed my life." So yeah, she wasn't yelling at me at all. And I couldn't believe Megan was tooling on me, to put it mildly. So could not believe it. So point is, that was a sign. I was becoming weakened. And also, I knew it was because I had been more reliant on crutches. Crutches are something you need as an aid. When in the case of a literal crutch, when you say you break your leg, obviously you need crutches. So there's nothing wrong with crutches, particularly in early sobriety. I say ABB, anything but booze. Most of us turn to coffee. I say at heart, we're beverageaholics. I saw a meme recently. The woman said, "I don't even like coffee anymore, but it's become my emotional support beverage." Absolutely same thing with me. I've tried to give it up several times. I'm still determined to give it up. But I do think it's going to give me this internal fortitude that already exists within me. But I think this brown water is going to help bring it out. It's not even the caffeine. I drink half calf, typically at best. But I don't drink decaf because that seems like a complete waste, just like I used to think of NA beers. But anyway, I have definitely been more and more relying on, almost chugging coffee when I had to do hard things, which would even include filming a video. And then I've always had Klonopin as an aid. I had asked my primary doctor about 20 years ago to just prescribe that for me for times when I had to give, say, a sales presentation, and I didn't want to drink for it. And a Klonopin is a sedative, if you will. I was going to call it a mild sedative, but depends how much you take. Now, warning, this is just for me. This is not medical advice. I'm not recommending anyone do this. It is a benzo, which can be addictive. What I believe in the case of at least myself is my addiction is much more when it comes to things with dopamine. Alcohol hits both our dopamine system and our GABA system. The Klonopin and benzos like that hit our GABA system. It relaxes us. Alcohol hits both. So it relaxes us, which relaxes our inhibitions, but it also gives us a dopamine hit, which makes us excitable. And that's why we tend to act like excitable maniacs with no inhibitions. So I've never gotten addicted to it. I've taken it for 20 years. It is a controlled substance. So I used to even have to beg to even get 10 of them per month. So I've always been very careful with it. And frankly, if I take too much of it, it'll just put me to sleep. So I'll take as little as a quarter of a pill of a 1 milligram tablet, typically no more than a half. But I did recently have to have a very difficult conversation about something, which I'd come to say in sobriety as I gain my confidence, difficult conversations just become conversations. Hard things just become things as you do the work and build up your sober confidence, just by doing hard things every day. But I had to have a very difficult conversation that I won't take the time to go into, but I took a full Klonopin, which I typically never do. I might have even end up taking 1.5. And in the end, it wasn't that difficult conversation, and I did not need it. But I took it anyway. So you do have to be very careful with crutches. Again, if you need a crutch, certainly in early sobriety, mid-sobriety, go for it. And early sobriety, by the way, can be as long as 1 to 2 years. Some think it might be, 3 to 6 months, but no. And I've heard agreement. Everyone's got different opinions on that, but I've heard some leading sobriety authors agree with me on that take. So, but imagine using a crutch if you didn't need it, for your leg. And that's essentially what I'm doing now with these things. I virtually have no anxiety. If anything, I need the Klonopin to counteract the coffee. So it's completely ludicrous. But I also recently was at a sobriety event at an NA liquor store, and I bought this Kentucky 45, I think it's, or 75, probably get that wrong, bourbon, NA bourbon. And I had planned to try to make an old fashioned with it, which I never really enjoyed drinking, but that was one drink that I actually did. And it has essentially just bourbon in it with you muddle in your cherries and oranges and all that. And so I bought some orange bitters, and AI had even suggested I make a video out of that. So I bought this bourbon. I thought I would save it, and I did actually till I had some company. So I had a dinner guest over recently, and I essentially made one, and I sipped it, which was always a dream. I'd seen people sipping bourbon on the rocks, and that was just magic to me, to sip any kind of alcohol. And I didn't even particularly like bourbon except in the form of an old fashioned. So anyway, I had a guest over. I made one. I sipped it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's just like, and I do enjoy NA beers. I typically don't drink them at home, but I say what I love about them is it's just like a regular beer without the annoying buzz. Because, that's the reality for those of us who alcohol has stopped working for. And it never really did, by the way, because it prevented us from learning true coping skills and learning how to enjoy life sober. So I do keep some NA beers around as well for when I have company, which is rare. But funny fact, I keep them hidden under my sink because they still look like the enemy. So I still don't want to see them. I know I am never drinking again, yet I still know that substance can just ruin my life. So it still kind of freaks me out to see it. It's sort of like when I see a police officer and I look at his gun and think, oh my God, he could freak out right now and just end my life. So I think it's kind of surreal seeing a gun. And same thing when I just see alcohol, it does make me think that. So yes, I keep my NA beers hidden, and I really don't drink them at home, partially because I thought I don't want to get into the habit like I used to of drinking every afternoon. That voice would talk me into drinking to be productive, which I learned was something I was self-medicating, my ADD, but I didn't realize it at the time. And by the way, that's what Adderall does. Adderall gives you a dopamine boost to make you want to be productive. But I learned in my 7-week Adderall experiment that those of us with addiction brains, it really doesn't work for, because it gives us that same euphoric survival hit that lends us to just want to have more and more and abuse it, or worry that the hit we just got is going to run out and need to have more. So I abused Klonopin just like I did with alcohol. Also, my brain caught on to it, just like when you would go for a period without drinking, and you might, again, be able to drink normally at first. And that's because it takes a little bit for your brain to catch up to it, but it will go and remove those dopamine sensors, just like when you were drinking originally, and it ends up having the same effect. It hijacks your pleasure baseline, and you need to drink more and more and more to get that effect, because it removes your dopamine sensor. So I have YouTube videos on basically everything I'm discussing now, so highly recommend you check it out under Sober Cappy. So The funny part, when I bought this, they only sell this good size NA bourbon. And the guy said it'll last in the pantry for about a month or 3 to 4 in the refrigerator. I thought, damn, I'm going to have to keep up refrigerator space for this thing because I'm going to need it for 3 to 4 months. So anyway, kicker is, so after my guest was here, I put it back in my fridge, but I hid it behind my Brita. But then realized I drink a lot of water. So anytime I took the Brita out, I would see the thing and I'd still have that surreal moment. Again, not tempting me to drink for real, but just thinking could ruin my life. So I hid it a little better in my fridge. But, it is kind of ironic, I think, that I officially become someone who hides fake alcohol from themselves. But anyway, point is, I was really low this past weekend, and I found myself doing shots of NA bourbon, including yesterday morning. I was feeling really low, and I knew I needed to film this podcast, and I did a couple shots of NA bourbon, and then I had a NA Corona kicking around. So during that, I had, and who else but an alcoholic would do it in shot fashion. So I did a few shots of that as well. Crazy, crazy. Now, again, this would never lead me to drink for real. It did make me think about going out and buying more. I mean, how funny is that? Running out for an emergency NA drink run. But my point is, this is all because I had gotten away from doing hard things sober every day. One guaranteed thing I do every day is my cold shower finish. Can't recommend that enough. Gives us a 250% dopamine kick and a 500+% neuroadrenaline kick, which is great for us, for focus, for us ADDers. But aside from that, sharing for so many years, it still is kind of surreal to be sharing. Probably the biggest reason is because you have to really suppress your judgment of yourself and worrying about others, which I've long stopped doing. What I love about community, and highly recommend everyone join one, is that it truly should be a judgment-free zone. So I did recently launch my community, Rewired Nation. Check it out. And a link will be in the bio. It's on the school platform. That actually contributed to my recent lower esteem as well, by the way, because I've been trying to launch this thing for 7 months, but I kept putting it off, mainly because of my ADD-related issues. And then finally I just said, well, maybe this will actually cure my ADD by launching. And finally I said, enough is enough. So I launched it about 3 weeks ago. And I even had Soba Megan, who has her own community, even said, yeah, I'm not sure you should be having calls so soon. And she was absolutely right. I did have 7 people on the first call, which was phenomenal. I had 4 on the next. Okay. And then on the next one, I had on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. On the Friday one, which I'd moved kind of last minute to 8 a.m. and it was on Memorial Day weekend, I had nobody on the call. Nobody. And just remembered, I drank a bunch of coffee and I did take Klonopin, at least a half a Klonopin leading up to that, just because I had a feeling nobody was going to be on and I didn't think I could deal with it. My sober mantra had been, who cares? And I should have kept that in mind. And I was going to postpone calls, but I do have a guy I am coaching and I made sure he could be on the next one. So the next one was say on at noon that next Monday, which was last week, I guess. Yeah, last week now. And he was on that and it was great. I essentially did a coaching call with him. And then on the next one, I knew he couldn't make it and I had a feeling. And again, nobody was on it. But this time I didn't cancel it. I wanted to go into it without pounding coffee and without taking a Klonopin. And I did. And guess what? I survived it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't join my community. I've now paused calls while I add content and promote the community to get more members in there, particularly those who are in early sobriety who really need daily calls. But even if you're further in sobriety, my community is going to be all about leveling up. Even the people in early sobriety, I want to get as excited as those that have a couple years of it to get to the next level and really start to thrive. And in the framework of my community, and this relates to what I'm talking about now as far as doing the work and why it works so much better for me getting sober this time around in community, is that the LEPT framework is learn, experiment, perform, and thrive. And that's something I did in community. At first, for the first 3 months, I was just a learner, not a lurker, as many people call themselves, a learner. I just listened. I was afraid to even share. It wasn't until a woman named Molly shared for 10 seconds, and I said, oh my God, it can be just that easy. Doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be the full 3 minutes. So then I started experimenting with sharing and being vulnerable and authentic. And then I started performing, much inspired by this great host named Louise, who she would dance it out. She'd play a song at the beginning of every call, and then at the end, she'd often dance it out. She would host dance parties. And it really got me to challenge myself to the point I would attend her dance parties, initially not on camera. Then I would just go on camera at the very end when I knew I wouldn't be on the first screen of cameras. And then I would take a cold shower, finish right in the middle of it, and join for the second half. And then by the end, I did the entire dance parties on Zoom. But I also sang on there. I sang Hot to Go, Hottogo, you can take me hot to go. And I sang a few other ones, story for another day. But I did start performing. And then I really started thriving in community. So again, learn, experiment, perform, thrive. And community is practice for real life. And then you can take it to the outside world and you can experiment, perform, and thrive there, which I had been doing up until, again, a couple months ago, when I had joined a community now almost a year ago where I could actually host calls. So that was, again, a huge step up in my sobriety. And I definitely experimented, performed, and thrived in that role. And that's what made me knew I wanted to launch my own. I've been in great communities, but I want to make mine even more educational, inspirational, and fun. Fun. So that was a step up. And then they had open mic nights, which I'm definitely going to have on my community, and talk about doing a hard thing sober. I mean, first of all, the first time I ever shared was the hardest thing I'd ever done sober. I broke down and sobbed after that was over. But then doing sober, and it was on my bucket list, sober stand-up comedy. So I did that, and several times. They had it once a month. And that's something I've stopped doing as well, partially because I didn't want to take the time to prepare my jokes because I was so busy trying to be productive. But again, that definitely hurt me. And then I just completed a coaching, alcohol-free empowerment coaching certification, all about changing the subconscious mindset. So I'm launching my coaching program as well, FYI. And we went on a retreat for that. I call it a business retreat because it was in a hotel, but it was very challenging. You know, I had to, especially with the ADD, I had to be at meetings starting at 10 a.m. every morning. We did photo shoots before everything. I didn't drink coffee for those entire 3 days. And the reason for that is because I got up and got my exercise and went for a run every morning. And then I went for a swim in the ocean every afternoon. And that's something I've also gotten away from recently. You know, I go out and I do star jumps in the sun. Those are jumping jacks from a squat position, but it doesn't get your endorphins going like a run does. So, you know, I have a freebie, a handout on the top 30 ways of doing the work. And especially in early sobriety, the big ones for me were the cold shower finish, sharing, even if you're not ready for that, at least attending sobriety calls, but ideally sharing. You can make it quick. You can do all these things with baby steps, and then exercise and sunlight. I knew if I didn't get all three of those things, I knew something was missing. If I was even one of those three was missing, I wasn't the same. So I'm going to kind of get to the real climax of this, which is that I took my own advice, which I say as soon as you're getting really down, as soon as that voice starts whispering to you, that's when you need to step up to work. That's when you need to make the call. Ideally, you've got an accountability partner. That's part of the work. That's something you can absolutely get in community, get paired up with someone that's around the same level you're at, same amount of tenure you have, if you will. It's different than a sponsor, which we don't really have in online communities, but also recommend someone that's got a senior level of longer term sobriety. You can still become accountability partners with. But you've got to make that call as soon as that voice starts whispering. If you let it get louder and that drinking, whispering that, oh, hey, drinking might be a good idea, because that's what that voice is. It's that ingrained neural pathway that we built up into a superhighway that's so entrenched that it believes alcohol is the answer to everything. And it senses weakness, vulnerability, and that's when it pounces. And that's when you've got to be at your strongest. You've got to tell it to F off out loud for as many times as it takes. If you wait and let that voice get louder and louder, and you wait to the moment that you're about to take that drink, people always say, why didn't you call me? Because at that point, it's almost always too late. That voice has made up your mind at that point. You've got to make that call much sooner. So that's what I did. And again, I truly believe I'm never going to drink again. I've learned every lesson in the book. It's never going to work for me. They say a slip is some learning in progress. And my book's going to be called, I've Done All the Research for You. It just doesn't work. But still, here I am doing shots of NA beverages. Although I have told people that's not the worst case scenario. You need your alternatives, ABB, anything but booze. I worry about people that just try to quit cold turkey without alternatives. I went to my college reunion a couple years ago at a brewery where I wasn't sure they'd have NA beverages. I brought a couple Gatorade, 20-ounce Gatorade bottles full of kombucha. It's kind of funny. The old days, I'd be filling those with wine. Now I'm filling them with kombucha. And I also brought a Klonopin. I didn't think I needed it. I had very high sober confidence at the time. But I walked in, it was brighter than I expected, and I didn't see anyone I felt comfortable talking with. I beelined right to the bathroom. I took that Klonopin, and then I started, swigging my kombucha. Before I knew it, I ran into a couple I felt very comfortable with, started talking to them, and I was fine for the rest of the night. I stayed there. I closed the bar at 1 a.m. I was looking for people to talk to. So again, it's not the worst case. Even people in the throes of addiction, I say, can't you try just chugging an NA beverage first? But I know that's easier said than done. Bottom line, even though I know that's not going to lead me to truly drinking, it's not the best habit. So I called my original accountability partner. It went right to voicemail. She's 2 hours behind, but she called me right back. And she could tell I had actually left her a message and said, hey, I could really use your support right now. She called me right back. That's the beauty of accountability partners. It's funny when I call one just to catch up, if they don't answer, I'll leave a message and say, this was a test of the emergency accountability partner system and you failed. Anyway, she didn't fail. She called me right back. We had an hour-long conversation. It was phenomenal. I also exchanged voice memos with Soba Megan, my mentor, and I felt much better. And then I took action of filming that podcast. And that is key. Action doesn't come from confidence. Confidence comes from action. You've got to take massive action daily. When you're ready, do it in baby steps. But doing that recording, I felt so much more confident because action generates direct experience, which builds competence, which creates genuine confidence. I haven't done many solo podcasts, really just the 2 original ones I did telling my story. Especially with my perfectionism, I was reluctant to do this. But I felt so much more confident after that. Any thoughts of running out and buying more NA beverages was out the window. And I was ready. I was sky high and I was ready to bring on my entire task list. So doing brings clarity and confidence. It's so important. Also, in terms of perfectionism, I always try to keep in mind, done is better than perfect. Making mistakes is better than faking perfectionism. And that leads to authenticity and personal growth. And that's what doing the work is all about. Spiritual growth and personal development. And getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. Embracing the tension, embracing the fear. That creates resilience, which creates greatness. And that's why cold showers are my number 1 sobriety tip. I know a lot of you will say you can keep your cold showers, but you got to trust me on this. Just start it with baby steps. And I have a complete list, as I started to allude to. My freebie is the top 30 ways of doing the work. We'll have a link in the show notes for that as well. And frankly, I am trying to build my email list and I'm trying to build my community membership. It is going to be awesome. Please check that out. Rewired Nation. My ADD coach says, when you aren't productive, he said, that's not a failure on you. That's a systems failure. I need to do the work to get systems in place. Just like when you slip, that is not a moral failure. This is a chronic brain disorder. And even if you are just a gray area drinker, it is extremely difficult to just moderate or to quit it all. I'm trying to moderate with coffee and I can't do it. And that's why I'm going to quit it. So remember that there's no shame in that. Never experience shame. And if anything, just channel that anger into doing the work. Can't stress that enough. I guess I'll end by just, a plug for community. If you don't join my community, just join a community. AA meetings are great as well. I even love going to those. I don't go to them often, but I'm even going to get back to doing those. Today, got back to the gym, by the way. I went for a run. I've been getting back into the running, and I'm going to be getting out more in real life, not just going to do dinner or breakfast with my parents and family. I may even start going to yoga, and I'm going to even start recording every day just to make sure I'm taking action every day. I might not even air it, but I'm going to be recording it. So, and community is so important. It's so much more important than trying to do it alone. Yes, I got sober alone in 3.5 years, although unknowingly I was doing hard things sober every day. I switched professions. I had to train myself up on a new profession. I got a job that was way over my head with a control freak boss. I would have been drinking at 7 a.m. every day if I wasn't sober, but I showed up every day. I was going to hot yoga with my girlfriend 3-4 times a week. That's like running a half marathon every day. So I was doing hard things sober, but I wasn't enjoying life. And that's ultimately what led me to drinking again. I broke up with my girlfriend. I was dating. I was boring. And I tried to drink normally. The good news about that slip is this time I did it in community, and it's so, so important. Connection prevents relapse, and isolation leads to relapse. The worst side effect of alcohol is isolation. Again, to bring this full circle, I've been isolating myself. And if I hadn't learned every lesson in the world, I probably would have even relapsed by now. And even though I'm convinced I never will again, I am doubling down on the work, and I am refortifying myself, or just fortifying myself to stay strong, to keep that voice quiet. Every day we don't drink, we get stronger, that voice gets weaker. It's a parasite. It needs alcohol to fuel, to reinvigorate, but that's the one curse we have. This is not a life sentence. The only thing that is that voice stays with us for life, but it shrivels up, and it can only reinvigorate if you take a drink, even so much as a sip, I have learned, which is why I will never even take so much as a sip again. So important. I'll end with that story. Well, 2 quick things. Having an accountability partner is so important. Just being in community and staying accountable is so important. They say a study found that stating an intention to another person increases completion chances by 65%, and it goes up to 95% with regular accountability practice, i.e. having a partner. And sharing is so important. They say pain shared or problem shared is pain halved. So important. And many go into communities with a lot of self-loathing, and the beauty of a community is they will love you until you can love yourself. And as far as why you can never even take so much as a sip, I was following a woman on Instagram. She was posting for her first full year of sobriety. She got to 300 days, and then her husband's had wine in the fridge. Very dangerous. If your partner drinks, you got to keep it in a separate fridge. Ideally, even keep it somewhere locked up. But she went in there for water, but for whatever reason, she was in a weakened state, perhaps wasn't fortifying, and she took a sip or a gulp. Amazingly, she made it through that night, and she made it through the next few days. But guess what? That voice got reawakened, and she ended up into a full-blown sliding away for several months. And she did finally manage to get back to a month of sobriety. She hasn't posted in a couple months, and I believe she's back struggling again. So you've got to remember that It is much easier to stay sober than to get sober. And every time you slip after abstinence, it actually gets harder. Fun fact. The longer you go, that 3.5 years was phenomenal. I was winning at life. But, so I knew after a week when I started drinking again, I couldn't drink normally. But I told you it took me 6 years to get back to a year. That's how hard it is. And again, what I was missing the first time was permission to enjoy life sober. And that's something I gained in community, and that's something you'll gain in my community as well. And related to that, I will end, I promise, with this. I know a woman who was at the Masters golf tournament, and she's sober, and a guy overheard her talking about her sobriety. And he turns to her with drink in hand and said to her, "I was once sober for 8 years, the best 8 years of my life." And then he took a drink. And that's how hard this is. We all know our life is better without it. But if you slip and you get back in the throes of that brainwashing, of that voice, it makes it that much harder to recover from. So I would beg of you, don't do it. Make that call. A slip happens long before you take that drink. As my buddy Derek just said on my podcast, the drink happens in your mind long before you physically take that drink. So you've got to make that call. As soon as that voice starts even whispering, you got to make that call. You got to double down on the work, and you've always, always, always got to stay fortified and in community. All right, that'll do it. As always, stronger, sober, and please like, share, subscribe. It only takes 2 seconds to submit a rating on Spotify or Apple. You just go to the main page and scroll down and ideally hit the 5 stars. I'd greatly appreciate it. And please share with your friends and share the community as well. Either you need it or you know someone that needs it. All right. Thanks for listening and or watching. Peace.